Okay. What I probably would do next time around, if I were to do the through the Bible in 1 year, one more time, I probably would want to make Joshua a 1 hour teaching, but we made it 2 hours this time. You probably noticed that the second half of the book is a lot about cities and allotment of land, so it's a little bit tedious for us to read. But you guys managed to read through it? Good. All right. Let's do a brief review where we're at, and then we'll take it from there. What we have learned so far, beginning with the book of Genesis. What was the book of Genesis all about? Creation, okay. And at a time when it was written is way later than when the stories happened. So why did Moses write it down?
They would remember.
To remember, yeah. And he's specific. Other than being a historian, he's also like the leader of Israel. So why did he write it down for Israel?
To give the people something to identify with.
Exactly, yeah.
Tell them of their beginnings.
Very good.
Trying to create the nation and give them a focus, a singular focus on a being greater than themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So very good. And so what is the major covenant that we read about in the book of Genesis?
He's going to be their God.
Right. And to who did he make that covenant? To who did God spoke? Abraham. So we are talking about the Abrahamic covenant. Yeah. And so we see the big picture of the book of Genesis is the first 11 chapters is like the beginning of the world, the ancient world, maybe I should say.
Right.
And then the beginning of Israel in chapter 12 to the end. And then so the covenant that we are talking about will be then the Abrahamic covenant that begins in chapter 12, verses 1 to 3, but it continues on into chapter 15, and then again in chapter 17. There is like more information given about the covenant. All right, and so what I would like to say is, like I remember Carrie also saying God created the world. That is the main point in Genesis. But I would like to say God elected a people as the reason why Moses wrote it down to the people that are at the moment having just come out of Egypt, and said God has selected you, God has elected you. It's just kind of like what Paul is going to do in the book of Romans. He talks about that we are elected into the kingdom of God. God has chosen us. And so again here also God elected a people, and that will be the people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham. All right, Exodus. So again, why do we have Exodus in our Bible? What is God doing?
Delivering his people.
Huh?
Delivering his people.
God is delivering his people. Very good. So again, it's a journey that Moses is taking with the Israelites, and from chapter 1 to 19, it's taking us to the Mount Sinai. And then once we have Mount Sinai in chapter 19, we stay there for the remaining of the book. And so I like to see it as a big picture of leaving Egypt behind and meeting up with God at Mount Sinai. They will stay there. They will stay there all the way through Leviticus, and only in Numbers chapter 10 verse 11 they will start to move again. So then only then they will be leaving Mount Sinai. So it's kind of leaving Egypt behind, meeting up with God at Mount Sinai. So what is the most important covenant that we learn now in the book of Exodus? So we have the Abrahamic covenant, which is a major one. The Mosaic covenant, right. Now in the Mosaic covenant, actually no new promises are given. Remember, a covenant is an agreement between two parties, and promises are made to one another. And actually no new promises. God already promised that he will give the descendants of Abraham land. God already promised that Abraham will have a great name. God already said that, through you will be a blessing. Through you will be a blessing to all the nations in the world, to all the families in the world. All those promises were already made back in Genesis, And the Mosaic covenant is just basically an extension of that, but now it's spoken to the whole nation. That Israel was supposed to be a blessing to the whole nation. That is very important that we understand that. Okay, that was their calling. That is why God had elected them, not just for Israel and for Israel's sake, but for the world's sake. God had elected Israel to be a witness to the world, a blessing to the nations. Yeah, and so God delivered his people. That's what Paulus said. Yeah, so that's just what God is doing in the book of Exodus. All right. Then we come to the Leviticus. All right. So what is God doing in the book of Leviticus?
Giving out laws for the nation to be identified with.
Yeah. And what type of laws? When I think of when I talk about moral absolutes like the Ten Commandments, when I think about the casuistic laws, that is, casuistic is like case by case. The word case is in it, in casuistic. Case by case. So like when Moses says, if this happens, then you do that. Civil laws. So we have the absolute laws, the moral laws, maybe I should say moral laws, civil laws, and then we have rituals and ritualistic laws or religious laws. And which of those three are major in Leviticus?
The religious.
Right, the religious laws. Very good. And so we have, what are we learning out of the book of Leviticus? All right. The big picture again is the centerpiece in the book will be the Day of Atonement, which is in chapter 16. Yeah. And so all up to chapter 16, it's all about the way to come to God. That's why we learn about all the sacrifices and so forth, and about clean and unclean. And when you're ritualistically unclean, or ceremonially, maybe I should say ceremonial laws, when I'm ceremonially unclean, then I need to go through some process to be ceremonially clean again. All right? And so that's all in chapter 1 to 16, the way to God. And then the Day of Atonement is the major one. I don't know if that was told by a previous. I spoke on Leviticus, didn't I? Anyway, so what is major is that there's one day out of the year, the high priest will make atonement for the whole nation, and that's the only time that the high priest actually goes into the most holy place. All right. And it's not in our Bible, but what is believed, that what Jewish tradition is telling us, is that there actually was a rope on the leg of the high priest. Did I ever mention that to you? And so that in case he drops dead, when he meets up with God, then they can pull him out. All right, so it was a very solemn occasion. But then when the high priest would come out, then there would be like a sudden celebration and jubilation, because that means that God has accepted our sacrifice for atonement, and that we are now forgiven as a nation. All right, so that is chapter 16, and then onward it's all about walking with God. It's all about, okay, now we are set free, we are forgiven, but how do we stay in a good relationship with God? And so there is like a continual chapters about that. And so what is God then doing with his people? We already have that God has elected his people, God already delivered his people, and what is God doing in the book of Leviticus? God is sanctifying his people. All right, God sanctified his people. All right, and now of course the covenant that we read about, the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant, now that covenant is possible. Now that we can be forgiven, our sins are being atoned for, therefore this relationship, this agreement is like possible. And so that is what I can say about the covenant. So God sanctified his people. Then we come to the book of Numbers. What's the book of Numbers about?
Census.
Census, yeah. A lot of numbers. So we had John Rennison, our accountant, he was an accountant by profession, come and talk about numbers. And then even Mark Smith talked a little bit about numbers. All right? But is it really about numbers, or what is going on? What is God doing with his people?
Just trying to teach them.
Try to teach them, right? Okay, and when the children are disobedient, what do we do as parents?
Discipline.
We discipline. All right. So what's the big picture? All right. The picture is that the journey begins, and then the journey was halted right at the time when the story of the spies happened. Remember, they sent in the 12 spies, and then when they came back, and then they had unbelief. Okay, and so it was because of unbelief and rebellion that they were not allowed to go into the promised land, and they were going to be stuck in the wilderness for 40 years. And that generation would have to die, and a second generation would come up, and so God will work with a new generation and take them into the promised land. And so what is God doing? God is disciplining his people. God disciplined his people in a time of Numbers. Now, if I forgot to do this, but if I wanted to make something about, if I wanted to have another entry about covenant, I would say the people broke the covenant. Yeah, I should have written that down in the PowerPoint. The people, so there was a covenant made, Abrahamic covenant, Mosaic covenant. Covenant is really possible now that we can come to God, Leviticus, and the first thing that the people do is break the covenant. In fact, they only left in chapter 10 verse 11. So basically when you read chapter 10 verse 11, when you read the next verse, it already says, and the people rebelled. And so they have a habit of constantly having unbelief and rebellion. And then a little bit later, a couple verses later, you read the story about them going into, sending the spies into the promised land and then come back, and then that was not good. Yeah? And so they were stuck in the wilderness for a couple chapters, and then God, with the second generation, would then continue. So the journey resumed in chapter 20. All right, God disciplined his people. Deuteronomy. Okay, we get a little bit more recent in time, all right? That's only a few weeks ago. What was happening in the book of Deuteronomy?
Just reiterating all the laws and developing them into a nation.
Yeah, so there is like a blueprint, a design given of how to become a godly nation. And so it is also a review, and there's sometimes laws have been changed a little bit because now the condition is going to be different. They're going to be living in the land rather than living in the wilderness and so forth. Yeah, very good. So again, there is a renewal of the covenant. Yeah, so again, we have the big picture, and this is a very typical. Carrie mentioned that, and that is, they make Moses used a particular format to structure the book of Deuteronomy, and that is in accordance to what we have discovered, ancient Egyptian Hittite treaties. And we even have found treaties such as the treaty between Israel and between Egypt and the Hittites that you now can find in the British Museum. And so it is structured according to that, all right? And so there is a history, stipulations and ramifications, consequences for when one party disobeys the covenant, when one party breaks faith or breaks the covenant, then there are consequences. So we call it the blessing and the curses. Yeah, and that is very important that we understand that, because when you come to the prophets later on in through the Bible in 1 year, all right, when we come to the prophets, what we are going to discover is that the prophets, we always assume that the prophets are all about foreseeing the future. Actually, that's not true. Yes, they do a little bit of foreseeing the future. Definitely they were speaking about Jesus and so forth, talking about the Messiah. But most of the time was spending about reminding the people about what?
What's happened in the past.
What happened in the past, and about what God said. If you break the covenant,
this is going to happen.
This is going to happen. And so basically the long list of blessings and curses that we see in, for example, Deuteronomy 28, the remaining of the Old Testament will be, we'll see that over and over again, that the prophets actually talk about that. And so they are not actually saying anything new or profound or, wow, how did you know that? Well, everybody could have known that, because you just read Moses, you read Deuteronomy and you would know. All right? So they were more like, rather than being a foretelling of what is going to be in the future, they behaved more like policemen, trying to bring people back to the law. And so they would, trying to, so that we don't break the law like a policeman would do. Yeah? So what did God do in the book of Deuteronomy? God covenanted with his people. So he renewed the covenant. This time he renewed the covenant with who? With the second generation. Because nobody except Joshua and Caleb would survive 20 years and up. So everybody 20 years and up in the world. Anybody that came out of Egypt 20 years and up will die in the wilderness. And then, except for Joshua and Caleb. Yeah? So God covenanted with his people. Now we come to our book for this week and last week, and that's Joshua. All right? Again, what is the big picture? Okay? So the big picture is that land is being conquered. All right? First 12 chapters, that is what Ron Smith talked about last week. All right? He briefly mentioned, and in this book, Nelson Maps in Church, and sometimes maybe like study Bibles, you will see maps, and you will see like how they went about to do it. And so we have like the central campaign, and then the northern campaign, and the southern campaigns. So there are like 3 major campaigns that Joshua makes, leading the people into conquering the land. And so that happens in a matter of 12 chapters, and then the remaining of the book is mostly about the allotment, who gets what, who gets which city, and so forth. Now it's not that all of the people, all of the enemies have been removed from the land, but they are basically now occupying the land. And then there is still at the end, when Joshua again also renews the covenant with the people in Joshua chapter 24 and 25, and then he says goodbye. He says goodbye to the people because he is now also very old, like Moses was. And Moses, in the end of Deuteronomy, said goodbye to the people. Joshua says goodbye to the people in a very formal address in the end of Joshua. All right? So what can I say about the covenant? Okay, whereas in Numbers, we saw that the people broke covenant. In Joshua, we see that God fulfilled the covenant. God fulfilled his promises. Ron even mentioned that to you last week. He even pointed out the scripture that says that God gave them the land as was promised. All right, so God has fulfilled, God has given the land to Israel, period. Yeah? Then, at that time. All right, God fulfilled his promise by giving Israel the land. That's the main idea, that's the main point of the book of Joshua. Yes, it is clearly in the book that yes, they do go in and have to fight, but all along you see that it is God that's giving them the victory. And so it is God that gave them the land. Yeah? All right, good. So, that is so far. Any questions so far about the book of Joshua?
I have a question.
Yeah, huh?
It's not clear to me why it was that the way it talks about dividing the land, that they did do the allotment to Caleb and Judah and Ephraim and Manasseh, and then there was a period where they didn't, and that's when Joshua had to cast lots to divide the land among the remaining 7 tribes. And it's like, why? What stopped them from taking possession of the land by tribe at that point?
Oh, the allotments, so the throwing of lots, basically. And you said why that is?
Well, my understanding was that some of the tribes, 2.5 tribes, were given land on the east side of the Jordan.
Yeah.
And then it talks about in chapter 14 that there was an allotment for Caleb. In chapter 15 there's an allotment for Judah. In chapter 16 there's allotments for Ephraim and Manasseh. And then it says there were still 7 tribes that didn't have their allotments yet. So why were those tribes given their allotments and the land clearly defined, and then for the remaining 7 they cast lots?
Cast lots, but their land was clearly defined, the allotment, wasn't it? Or did you review?
They said they then sent out people to make records of the areas and whatever, and then they cast lots for them. But why were those first ones so clearly, this is yours, this is yours, this is yours, and then the next ones, it almost seems like they were stepchildren.
Right. Good question. I don't know why that is. Good point. But when you look at the map, so we, oh, by the way, I do have handouts for you guys. So I drew a map myself, and that will be, so this is Joshua. Okay, here's Joshua. On the back is a map, and this is Deuteronomy. And then also the PowerPoint, actually, I got it. I didn't want to give out the handout yet because I wanted you to not cheat on there and then give me all the answers from Genesis all the way to Joshua. But now we are ready for giving you the handouts. So when you look on the map, which is not, I don't have a 4-color printer, so I wasn't able to give it to you nicely in color, but you can find it in every, probably in your study Bible, and then in Nelson Maps and Charts and Bible dictionaries, how the land has been allotted to them. And so what Linda says may be very well true, that some of it was allotted by lots, by casting of lots. Go ahead and give the Deuteronomy 2, and then this, I'll help you with this. Yeah, this one we can give too. That is the PowerPoint.
Who's the other half tribe of Manasseh then?
So we have Manasseh, which is here, which will be East Manasseh, and this is West Manasseh.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. The half tribe of Manasseh.
And the town of Jerusalem is part of the Benjamites.
Kind of like at the border with Benjamin and Judah. So here it is actually laying on. I don't know if it's clear on my map, but if you look here, you see Jerusalem is actually on the Judah side. Green is Judah here. So, but it's right at the border, yeah, with Benjamin.
So then, Jesus is. He came out of. They call Jesus was supposed to be from the city of David. But was David a Judahite?
Yeah.
I suppose he was part of the tribe of Judah.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact,
I don't.
You can. I just in Maps and Charts, the last article that I wrote. Do you have other Maps and Charts? No. So you can look it up at home. But it says the 12 identities. And so when you read, for example, it says, okay, it mentions the 12 tribes, and then famous descendants from these tribes, and so it goes down the list. From the tribe of Levi will be Aaron and Moses, and then later in Samuel, the book of Samuel, we read about Eli, but also like Ezra and then John the Baptist are all from that particular tribe. And Judah, that's the one you're now asking about, Caleb, David, Solomon, maybe Isaiah, and of course the most famous person, which is Jesus, are all from the tribe of Judah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you can go on like that with the other, and so you have a list of that as well. Yes, Antonio.
Number 3, the Levi, where I can find in the map? I couldn't find it here.
Okay, good, very good question. Why can I not find the tribe of Levi on the map? All right.
Well, because Levi didn't get land.
They didn't get any land. Why didn't they get any land?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Serving God.
Okay.
That was
Yeah.
their law.
Yeah.
Why didn't get land?
They're like missionaries. They're supposed to be like me. They don't own any land. You just travel and minister. Well, they did. They were given cities.
They were given cities,
Yeah.
which were in all the tribal lands.
Yeah.
So they were dispersed throughout the nation.
Yeah.
And being the priests within each of the tribal territories and
Yeah.
the cities that they had, where they were generating churches or whatever it was that they were generating at that time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So very good.
They only had one temple, which really, not only one tabernacle that they spoke of.
Right. There is only one center of worship.
Right. That wouldn't really.
So 3 times a year, like they didn't have, in those days they didn't have like what we do now is we go to church every Sunday. They didn't have that.
Right.
All right. There were 3 main events that the whole nation needs to come together for, which is the Passover Tabernacles and the other one.
Shelters and
Right.
it was all roughly in the same period of time.
And so the 3 main festivals, they have to go to Jerusalem. Yeah. So, yes, Levites. So Levites, what we see is they are not being given. But when you drop Levi off the list, you're down to 11. Right? How do we fix that?
You divide the Manasseh.
Huh?
Divide the Manasseh.
Well, Joseph also didn't being given a land. You don't see Joseph.
Here,
What?
Joseph get a lot of things together.
But no, Joseph, yeah, but you see it is the two sons of Joseph are each given land. So that is why it's divided up, which is Ephraim and, what's the other son of Joseph? Ephraim and Manasseh, okay? So Ephraim and Manasseh are the sons of Joseph, and so they now actually become an individual tribe. In other words, Joseph gets a double inheritance. Both of his sons get the same treatment as everybody else and being given a piece of land. Yeah? So that makes the number go back to 12 again. So Levi is not on there, Joseph is not on there, but then two sons of Joseph are again on the map. Yes?
So now they still have this kind of division there. They can tell, or just one country like Israel nowadays.
Yeah?
They still kind of have this division there inside the country?
No. All these boundaries, in fact, to be honest with you, the map that you see related to the book of Joshua, they will never actually claim it that way. For example, the tribe of Dan, which you see is further in the south, but they are disobedient. We're going to read about it soon in the next book, okay? In the book of Judges, because they are actually not fulfilling, they are not having faith, they are not continuing, because you see, as I said, the enemy has not fully yet driven out of the land, yeah? So they have to continue to do that. So they are occupying the land, but not having driven out the enemy yet. So Joshua gives them the task, now finish the task, and they don't. And we're going to soon find out about that in the book of Judges, and you're going to find out about how bad it's going to be for them that they are not obeying what God tells them to do, because the book of Judges is actually a very depressing book. All right?
It surprised me that, in Joshua, that God disciplined them for not following his instructions when it came to Ai.
Right.
But then as they went through their 7-year siege of all the rest of the territory, they did not root out all the other inhabitants within the areas that they were given.
Yeah.
And it said that they interspersed within them, that they couldn't drive them out, so that they ended up living with them. And it surprised me that there was no discipline as a result of that, at that point.
Right.
It wasn't quick and just, and he wasn't God wasn't slamming the people then because they failed to follow his specific instruction.
Right.
Like he did with Ai.
Right. Well, but that basically is because God, what does it say about God? God is slow to anger.
Yeah.
Many, many times. In fact, when you read through the whole Old Testament, many people first think that, oh, I don't like the God of the Old Testament because there is so much judgment and war and so forth. But in truth, actually, God, you'll discover that was I God, I probably would have lost my patience a long time ago, and I would have judged the people a long time ago. But God actually is loving and merciful and slow to anger. And that really comes out in all of the Old Testament. When I read the Old Testament, I don't see any difference between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament. The way we know God in the New is the same God that He is in the Old. So, yeah. Okay. Any other questions or remarks about the book of Joshua? Yeah. All right. Now I want to briefly talk about it's really, why is this important? Because people do take offense. Because what we are actually seeing in the book of Joshua is genocide. Because a whole people group is being wiped out. Yeah? And that is, what are the instructions that God has given? All right? Okay. In the book of Deuteronomy, when it comes to the people in the land, what does God say? God says, but these instructions, now, that is just being said in verses 10 to 14, yeah? These, when I'm just picking up the story, So about terms of peace, okay, to avoid war with foreign nations, all right? But these instructions apply only to the people from far away, the distant towns, all right? Not to the towns of the nations in the land you will enter. In those towns, that is, in those nearby towns, yeah, in those towns that the Lord your God is giving you as a special possession, destroy every living thing. You must completely destroy the Hittites, the Amorites, and all the other termites, all right? Just as the Lord your God has commanded you, yeah? This will prevent, so this will prevent the people of the land from teaching you to imitate their detestable customs in the worship of their gods, which could cause you to sin deeply against the Lord your God. All right? So, number one, so the question, this is kind of like what is holy war. What is holy war? Holy war means that everything is to be destroyed and it is being treated like a sacrifice unto God. It is like everything is laid on an altar. So, okay, so everything is laid on the altar. It's like a city, yeah? And so all the animals are supposed to be destroyed, everything is supposed to be wiped out. That is the concept of holy war. Now we don't have holy wars today, all right? We can't do that today. Only we can never assume that we're on a holy war. How can we assume that we are with God? What about the people in the city? Maybe God is with them. Today we have a dilemma, and that is if we go to war and we drop bombs, we probably also drop bombs on Christians.
Yeah.
That's a difficult issue, all right? The early Christians, they were pacifists. They wouldn't fight in military. By the way, the Jews also wouldn't fight in the armies in the Roman armies, all right? That the Jews wouldn't fight in the Roman armies is for practical reasons, because every time it's Sunday they would refuse to fight, or Saturday, because it would be a Sabbath. They were not very good soldiers in a Roman army. But then the early Christians, following the teachings of Jesus, Jesus teaching about a spiritual kingdom,